My name's Kyle Gobin. I'm a student at Iowa State University. Over the last couple of years, I've interned at a few different companies, Vermeer Manufacturing, JP Morgan Chase, and I also work on campus as a teaching assistant. So I've had quite a bit of experience in a few different areas of software development. Most of my main roles over the last year have been the majority in front-end development. Over the summer, I worked in React.js, primarily making a user interface for a dashboard. And so I use a lot of front-end tools like React, Next.js, that type of thing. And then over the last couple months, participated in a variety of hackathons, which are 24-hour sprints of the start to finish of a new project. And so I've used Pieces a lot in those, as well as my general workflow throughout school.
A lot of our users are junior developers that are using it to store code as they go into an interview. Could you also touch on the IDEs that you use and any other tools that might be in your stack?
Yeah, so I think primarily like I said, over the last year or so, I've used a lot of VS Code for most of my code experience. As far as storing snippets before Pieces, I'd say it's pretty minimal, leaving comments on different files or saving them to a notepad or some sort of a file like that. It's been primarily how I've been storing those. As far as things in my stack, like I said, a lot of React, Next.js, use Svelte for a couple projects. So I think that's primary in my stack. And then also using ChatGPT for some code generation. Like I said, before Pieces, using GPT-4 and maybe some of the plugins that are online have been really helpful for me. Using React, but then a lot of JavaScript, CSS styling, but also some Tailwind I've used quite a bit in different personal projects and things school related. But as far as like industry is more, I think we were using more CSS styling for that. But
I'm curious, before Pieces for developers, what did your workflow sort of look like when it came to generating code, storing code, sort of the context switching between different tools? Is there anything that you use to boost your productivity or help you manage your snippets and other workflow materials? What does that look like for you?
So before Pieces, I wasn't really using, for the most part, any tools like that. I think for the most part, I was either doing like a Google search or I was going to ChatGPT and generating code that way. And then pretty much just copying code and pasting it into VS Code in a separate file or commenting it out in a certain file. It was sometimes a pain point if I ever wanted to go back and review those. So that made that a little difficult. But before Pieces, I didn't really have a solution to manage those very well. So I think for the most part, just copying and pasting in, and then maybe using that headache later, trying to figure out where it came from or where I could copy and paste it into.
And as for the websites that you visited, did you ever search through your browser history, or would you just basically try to find the same website? Or you're doing a lot of research, you find a really good code snippet after a while. How do you go back and reuse that code snippet?
Before, like I said, I was copying and pasting them in, and then I tried to remember in my head the general date of what I was searching for, or I was going back into my search history and I knew it was on Stack Overflow, or I knew it was on Friday. And so I went back a few weeks and looked at all the Fridays until I could find that code snippet or that website that talked about a tutorial about it or that type of thing. So it definitely caused a pretty big headache when it came back to going and reviewing where those snippets came from.
ChatGPT, I know it's a newer technology, but generative AI, has it been integrated into your workflow for a while now, generating code snippets from scratch, or were you more the Stack Overflow type user?
I think before ChatGPT, so maybe over the course of the last few months, I've migrated a lot of my code generation to ChatGPT, or like looking things up that way. But after a few months ago was the switch, I think. And as far as reviewing code snippets on ChatGPT, you wouldn't like to see my chat history in there. It's a mess. And so even searching for those code snippets in there, I might have to scroll through 100 different conversations looking for the code snippet I was looking for, the conversation I had in the past.
Are there specific ways that you think that ChatGPT could be a little bit better in terms of maybe searching through a better search and for your conversations, or maybe AI summaries or other annotations of your chats?
I would say so. As far as looking for those previous conversations, I find it a bit annoying to have to delete them each time if I don't want to see them again. But I found that after you first start your first chat, that's what it titles the chat as. For instance, if I was looking for the answer to a math problem, if I said, what's 2 plus 2? That's end up being the conversation title. And so if I completely change routes later in that conversation, I'd start talking about something else. It doesn't go and change that title. And looking for something that maybe was far down in a conversation actually proves to be pretty difficult when trying to base that code snippet just off that end conversation.
Right. And it's kind of similar to how Pieces automatically enriches things as you save it. It gives it a title, but that title is going to be hyper relevant because it's only applied to the code snippet as opposed to an entire conversation. And Pieces has recently just introduced these persisted copilots so that you can have a list of conversations similar to ChatGPT. But along with the title that's initially generated, we also have annotations that sort of summarize, say, chapters of your conversations as you go, as well as AI summaries that summarize the entire conversation as well. Have you had a chance to try out that new feature or check out our persistent copilot chats that work across the different tools that you're using?
On ChatGPT, I might have a list of conversations, but the conversations are pretty in depth, or the load time takes a bit to open each chat. But I have found Pieces to be a little bit quicker in that regard. Maybe finding a code snippet through 30 conversations, I feel like would be a lot faster and easier on Pieces versus on ChatGPT, where I'm, scrolling through so many conversations, clicking on them, hoping that maybe I'm clicking on the right one after a few minutes, getting frustrated and just starting a new chat, trying to get it generated again.
I think I have the same issue. All of my chats are named something really wonky, and I start to change my recall of that conversation based on that title.
Yeah.
And so that sort of leads me to another question just about your experience with Pieces, like the context that is auto enriched around your code snippet. So think the title, the description of anything that you save. Is that sort of a natural thing that you were able to quickly understand as opposed to the traditional method of just reading the code and recalling a certain snippet by the syntax, as opposed to this sort of natural language description of a code snippet? So is that something that's comes natural to you, or was it something to get used to as you continue using the app?
I think for the most part, it came pretty naturally and quickly. Like I said, coming from ChatGPT, where it's just a mess, having something organized to where something I'm recognizing actually means something versus the 6 grapes, some random sentence on ChatGPT. I'm just trying to match them in my head with the code snippet I was looking for. And so I did find Pieces very informative to which snippet I was actually looking at, looking for the actual summary that made sense versus trying to match up something random in my head. So I did think that was very straightforward and quite helpful for someone who doesn't go back and want to rename each chat as I go along.
So tell me about your initial impressions with Pieces. Like you've used the Notes app, you've commented out things, that you'll research them on Google. What were your initial thoughts when downloading Pieces?
Initial thoughts, I thought it was interesting that there were several different platforms. There's the VS Code extension, there's the actual desktop app itself, there's the Chrome extension that integrates into that. And initial thoughts were it was really nice to, if I was looking on Stack Overflow or some code snippet online, the fact that I can copy a code snippet like that and the fact that it saves the web page that I'm looking at, I found really cool that it does all that out of the box. I felt like it really saved some time linking that website so I didn't have to go back into my search history to find that. So I found that really interesting. And then also is some of the generative AI features, being able to query on a different repository I was working on. I felt like over the past week, I've dove a little more into that feature itself. I was actually working in a hackathon a couple weekends ago, working in a new framework. It was a financial literacy project, basically. And so we created a repository. It was in Dart. I'd never worked in Dart before. And so I was panicking a little bit in the beginning. And so some of my other teammates had worked in Dart before, and so they knew what they were doing. And so I found as our repository got more complex over the course of the hackathon, I found my contributions to start slowing down. But that's when I remembered that I had Pieces and I could actually query on the actual repository. And if there was something I was working on trying to integrate some button or some page on the screen, I was actually able to query on that repository and ask, where should I put this code? Or how is this framework formatted to where this is how I declare a button type of deal? And so using Pieces to show me the lay of the land or where I can put my code, I found really helpful in that situation.
You mentioned that you have used Pieces around the interview process. Is that before the interview when you're preparing, or is it during the interview? Maybe you could walk me through maybe an example of using Pieces to help you try to get a job more easily.
I think it's a little bit of both along the stage. So as far as preparing for an interview, the classic leak code problems that maybe some people don't know how to solve, or some of the problems are really difficult, I have found Pieces nice to maybe solve those problems in. I found myself saving different snippets of like the solution to the problem, working through it, and then saving my solution in a snippet. And so I found that helpful for gathering a list of my answers or my development process through those. But then also during the interview, if I'm in an interview and I can look at some of these different code snippets of what I've worked on, I did find it helpful maybe to show my work or be able to explain some of these complex problems with the snippets that I'd saved that are readily and easily available for me to search through, look at, and solve through like that. I think a lot of the places where I was going back and reviewing those snippets for like interviews or those leak code problems like that, looking at snippets, I was using the desktop app, using chat features, usually in the VS Code extension. I did find it will be to be more intuitive to search through the desktop app, find my snippet, and then maybe copy and paste that if I needed it while I was coding or in a different spot. That's where I found to use the code snippets portion. The Chrome extension was maybe saving snippets from the internet, or the VS Code was more, I feel like, large language model driven as far as like querying on different repositories I was working on.
Are there any other ways that, Pieces sort of helps you integrate your workflow between tools? Do you find that it helps you reduce context switching at all?
I did find context switching between the internet or Stack Overflow and my actual coding. I did find it a lot easier to go back and forth, and if a week later I wanted to go back to that code snippet, I could find it again on Stack Overflow with the saved link that I already had.
Are there any other noticeable productivity gains using Pieces?
I did find the large language model feature, being able to set the context of different files or different repositories that I was working on, did help a lot. Like when I was using GPT-4 to get that context that I wanted, I actually have to copy and paste files in the file I'm working on, maybe dependencies that I have to copy all that in. But with Pieces, I can just set that context and then just hit the ground running with whatever question I had. And in the last week, I found that really helpful and found some real use cases for that itself.
Just broadly, what's your overall satisfaction level with Pieces, and would you recommend it to other people?
I liked it a lot. I found saving the code snippets from like a Stack Overflow page or some other code snippet online to be a really useful tool. Saving that website, that was probably my favorite feature. I just thought it was really cool. I hadn't thought about it before. That seems like such a good idea. And then also using some of the large language model type features, setting the context for a certain repository, I found really helpful in a lot of cases. A couple weekends ago, I was at that hackathon and I was referencing this project, and it was really awesome to be able to use Pieces to set the context of that entire repository and reference the whole project. And so I also found that really helpful. So those are my two beyond favorite features of Pieces, and I would definitely recommend it to, anyone that's looking for snippet management, or honestly any developer that uses any sort of large language model tool to help them generate code or help them document or reference code in any way. I found it really helpful.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kyle.